Greetings and welcome back to the Global Business Channel. Thank you for joining us once again today. In this video, we'll be discussing Recommendation 5 of the Financial Action Task Force's 40 recommendations concerning terrorist financing offenses in Part C of the FATF Recommendation Handbook. Additionally, we'll be reviewing the 12 interpretative notes accompanying Recommendation 5 found on pages 43 to 44 of the handbook. We publish videos regularly covering topics related to offshore global business, corporate, financial, and compliance sectors. We encourage you to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up if you find these topics interesting. Without further delay, let's get started with today's video. Recommendation 5 of the FATF pertains to terrorist financing offenses. Countries should criminalize terrorist financing based on the Terrorist Financing Convention of 1999. This includes not only the funding of terrorist acts, but also the financing of terrorist organizations and individual terrorists, even if there is no direct link to a specific terrorist act. Additionally, countries should classify these offenses as predicate offenses for money laundering. For reference purposes, the Terrorist Financing Convention, formerly known as the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 9, 1999. This convention aims to enhance international cooperation in combating terrorism by criminalizing the act of financing terrorist activities. Key provisions of this convention include: Number 1, definition and criminalization. The Convention defines the crime of financing terrorism as the provision or collection of funds with the intention or knowledge that they will be used to carry out terrorist acts. It criminalizes not only the funding of specific terrorist acts, but also the financing of terrorist organizations and individual terrorists, regardless of whether a specific act is carried out. Number 2, state responsibilities. Signatory states are required to adopt measures to prevent and counteract the financing of terrorism, including the freezing of assets and ensuring that financial institutions and other entities are not misused for terrorist financing. States must also take necessary steps to identify, detect, and seize funds allocated for terrorist activities. Number 3, international cooperation. The Convention promotes international cooperation in investigations and judicial proceedings related to the financing of terrorism. States are encouraged to share information and assist one another in the extradition and prosecution of individuals involved in terrorist financing. And number 4, preventive measures. Financial institutions are mandated to implement strict customer identification, record-keeping, and reporting procedures to detect and prevent terrorist financing. States must supervise and regulate entities such as banks, insurance companies, and money transfer services to ensure compliance with anti-terrorism financing laws. The Terrorist Financing Convention of 1999 is a crucial instrument in the global fight against terrorism. By criminalizing the financing of terrorism and promoting international cooperation, it aims to cut off the financial resources that enable terrorist groups to operate, thereby reducing the threat of terrorist activities worldwide. The convention has been widely adopted and forms the basis for many national and international legal frameworks targeting terrorist financing, such as, in this case, Recommendation 5 of the Financial Action Task Force. Recommendation 5 of the FATF is a critical guideline focusing on the criminalization of terrorist financing. It is designed to ensure that countries have robust legal frameworks to detect, prevent, and punish the financing of terrorism. Key elements of Recommendation 5 include: Number 1, criminalization of terrorist financing. Countries should criminalize terrorist financing in line with the requirements of the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism 1999, which we just discussed. This includes the financing of terrorist acts, terrorist organizations, and individual terrorists, even if the funds are not directly linked to a specific act of terrorism. Number 2, predicate offense to money laundering. Terrorist financing offenses should be designated as predicate offenses for money laundering. This means that the act of financing terrorism should be considered as a basis for prosecuting money laundering offenses. Number 3, scope of financing. The definition of terrorist financing should cover both direct and indirect provision or collection of funds. This includes funds that may be used for travel, training, recruitment, or other support activities related to terrorism. Number 4, implementation of measures. Countries must adopt measures to detect and prevent terrorist financing, including freezing and confiscating funds intended for terrorist activities. Financial institutions and other entities should implement systems to monitor and report suspicious transactions that may be linked to terrorist financing. And number 5, international cooperation. Countries are encouraged to cooperate and exchange information with other nations to combat the financing of terrorism effectively. This includes mutual legal assistance, extradition, and sharing of intelligence related to terrorist financing activities. Recommendation 5 is essential in a global fight against terrorism, as it targets the financial lifeline that enables terrorist organizations to plan, execute, and sustain their operations. By ensuring that countries have stringent laws and mechanisms to combat terrorist financing, the FATF aims to reduce the threat of terrorism and enhance international security. Countries that comply with Recommendation 5 contribute to a unified global effort to undermine terrorist financing networks. This compliance helps in safeguarding the international financial system from abuse and enhances the overall effectiveness of global counter-terrorism initiatives. We will now be focusing on the 12 interpretative notes accompanying this recommendation. Interpretative Note 1 regarding the recommendation's objective states that Recommendation 5 was created to ensure that countries possess the legal framework to prosecute and impose criminal penalties on individuals who finance terrorism. Due to the strong connection between international terrorism and activities such as money laundering, Recommendation 5 also aims to highlight this link by requiring countries to categorize terrorist financing offenses as predicate offenses for money laundering. Interpretative Note 2 concerning the characteristics of the terrorist financing offense stipulates that terrorist financing offenses should encompass any individual who intentionally provides or collects funds or other assets by any means, directly or indirectly, with the illegal intention or knowledge that they will be used in whole or in part, A, to commit a terrorist act, B, by a terrorist organization, or C, by an individual terrorist. Interpretative Note 3 argues that terrorist financing also includes funding the travel of individuals who go to a country other than their residence or nationality to perpetrate, plan, prepare for, or participate in terrorist acts, or to provide or receive terrorist financing. Interpretative Note 4 emphasizes that it is not sufficient to comply with this recommendation by criminalizing terrorist financing solely on the grounds of aiding and abetting, attempt, or conspiracy. Interpretative Note 5 asserts that terrorist financing offenses should encompass any funds or other assets, regardless of whether they originate from legitimate or illegitimate sources. Interpretative Note 6 states that terrorist financing offenses should not necessitate that the funds or other assets, A, were actually used to execute or attempt a terrorist act, or B, be connected to a specific terrorist act. Interpretative Note 7 stipulates that countries should ensure that the intent and knowledge necessary to establish the offense of terrorist financing can be deduced from objective, factual circumstances. Interpretative Note 8 emphasizes that natural persons convicted of terrorist financing should face effective, proportionate, and dissuasive criminal sanctions. Interpretative Note 9 argues that criminal liability and sanctions, or, if not possible, due to the fundamental principles of domestic law, civil or administrative liability and sanctions should apply to legal persons. This should not preclude parallel criminal, civil, or administrative proceedings for legal persons in countries where multiple forms of liability are available. These measures should not affect the criminal liability of natural persons. All sanctions must be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. Interpretative Note 10 asserts that attempting to commit the offense of terrorist financing should also be considered a crime. Interpretative Note 11 argues that it should also be an offense to engage in any of the following types of conduct. A. Participating as an accomplice in an offense as outlined in paragraphs 2 or 9 of this interpretative note. B. Organizing or directing others to commit an offense as outlined in paragraph 2 or 9 of this interpretative note. C. Contributing to the commission of one or more offenses as outlined again in paragraphs 2 or 9 of this interpretative note by a group of persons acting with a common purpose. Such contribution must be intentional and shall either 1. Be made with the aim of furthering the criminal activity or criminal purpose of the group, where such activity or purpose involves the commission of a terrorist financing offense, or 2. Be made with knowledge of the group's intention to commit a terrorist financing offense. And finally, Interpretative Note 12 states that terrorist financing offenses should apply regardless of whether the individual alleged to have committed the offense is in the same country or a different country from where the terrorist or terrorist organization is located, or where the terrorist act occurred or will occur. And that wraps it up for today's video on Recommendation 5 issued by the Financial Action Task Force. Thank you for sticking around until the end of this video. Your support means a lot to us, and we hope you found the information, insights, and key points valuable. We'll continue to share informative content regularly, so don't hesitate to return to the Global Business channel for insightful videos on the offshore, global, compliance, and financial services sectors. Take care, stay safe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheerios.